Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. You've tuned in to WHIVLP New Orleans, your community radio station for social justice and human rights and all wars. You can live stream us on WHIVFM.org from anywhere around the world, and you can also catch us in the greater New Orleans area on 102.3 FM. This is Jenny Yanez, your host for NOLA Matters, Islam in the Crescent City. If you've joined us before, you know that WHIVLP New Orleans is supported by listeners like you. To become a member of 102.3 WHIV, visit our website at WHIVFM.org and click the donate button, select become a member. Sustaining... You didn't start it.
No, that's what I was trying to mention.
Oh, Dr. Bazian, we're special people in New Orleans.
I was trying to get your attention, but you were...
We will start again. And I'm just going to leave the feed as it is. It is interesting and okay.
Murphy's Law.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. One more time. Third time's the charm. Third time's the charm. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. You've tuned in to WHIVLP New Orleans, your community radio station for social justice and human rights and all wars. You can live stream us at WHIVFM.org from anywhere around the world. And we are also on 102.3 FM on the radio in the greater New Orleans area. This is Jenny Yanez on NOLA Matters, Islam in the Crescent City. If you've tuned in before, you know that WHIVLP New Orleans is supported by listeners like you. Become a member of 102.3 WHIV by visiting our website at WHIVFM.org and click on the donate button. Select become a member, and sustaining membership allows WHIV to continue to provide programming dedicated to human rights and social justice. Monthly sustaining memberships can be for any amount, $1, $5, $10, $20, $50, or $100, or any amount you'd like to contribute to keep the programming going at WHIVLP New Orleans, like Islam in the Crescent City. Remember, donations are tax deductible. Be a part of the revolution. Show your support today. And we know that the blessed and holy month of Ramadan is coming. So I'm not going to say it's zakat. So it's not what I'm asking at all. But if you want to throw a little bit of sadaqah, then you could definitely become a member. I will answer any questions you have about the mission of the station and especially about the program that I've produced and host. And thank you so much for tuning in. Last year we had shows on Ramadan for the whole month, and we'd like to be able to bring that to you again this year. So alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for continuing to tune in. So if you've tuned in before, you also know that I begin the hour with the Muslim Minute, and the Muslim Minute is where I share a translation from the Holy Quran and also from the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And that usually inspires me for the theme of today's show or that show. And that will give you a hint of who our guest is on the hour. So from the Holy Quran, I'm reading from Surah 95, ayahs, and the first ayah, by the fig and the olive and Mount Sinai and this secure city, we have made man in the finest order. And I'm going to read another verse, short verse, from Quran, Surah 24, Ayah 35, in translation. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The lightness of divine light is as of a niche within a lamp inside. The lamp is in a glass. The glass is as if a shining star, lit from a blessed olive tree, neither of the east nor of the west. Its oil nearly luminous, even without fire touching it. Light upon light. God guides whomever God will to divine light, and God gives people examples, and God is cognizant of everything. From the sayings, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, 12,000 Muslims will not be defeated for lack of number. And I'm going to give a little context to that, and that should introduce who our special and honored guest is today. I'm quoting from Hamza Yusuf, which is the president of Zaytuna College, and also a well-known Islamic scholar. Our Prophet's promise testifies that a unified body of sincere believers, standing 12,000 strong, is equal to a critical spiritual mass that can overcome any obstacle. And with that, I'm going to introduce our special and honored guest for today, Dr. Hatem Bazian. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It is indeed an honor and a pleasure that you have visited us in New Orleans. Is this your first time to come to New Orleans?
My second time, but my first time at the station, so thank you.
So you're most welcome. This is, whenever you come back, you know that this is your home. Our masajid in our homes are your homes as well. But for those of us who are listening that may not really have the pleasure of knowing your body of work, I'll introduce a little bit about it, about your body of work. And you a little bit, of course I'm not going to do it justice, but Dr. Hatem Bazian is a provost, co-founder, and professor at Zaytuna College. He is also a teaching professor in the departments of Near Eastern and Ethnic Studies at the University of California in Berkeley. Dr. Bazian is an advisor to the Religion, Politics, and Globalization Center at UC Berkeley. In 2009, he founded the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at UC Berkeley, editor-in-chief of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and founder and director of the International Islamophobia Studies Consortium. Dr. Bazian is on the board of several organizations, including the Islamic Scholarship Fund, Muslim Legal Fund of America, and Muslim Americans for Palestine, for which he is also the founding president. And that is not all that you do. So you are a very busy person, but we're honored to have you on the show. Is there anything that I missed that you'd like others to know about you?
Just, I'm a human that is attempting to make change.
And isn't that lovely? Isn't that we all should strive for? You know, alhamdulillah. I'm going to
To
say...
the better.
For the better. I'm going to say a little bit about Zaytuna, but I really want you to begin with that because Zaytuna College now, right? It used to be Zaytuna Institute?
Yes. Zaytuna Institute was set up in 1996, and at the time it was focused on providing extended education or continued education for the Muslim community, but specifically to reacquaint the broader Muslim community with much of the traditional sources and to renew our attachment to knowledge and the acquisition of knowledge. And from 1996, a number of projects and programs, possibly the Deen Intensive, the Rihla program, where many people benefited through the Zaytuna Institute, translations, some of the materials, getting people to begin to study what we call Fard Ayn, specific individual obligations, matters of prayers, fasting, zakat, hajj, and all these elements. But at a certain point, in beginning post 9/11, the idea of creating a seminary was circulated, and for a period of time we began to experiment with a seminary, and we had 5 students that were enrolled in the project, and 4 of them actually graduated. But at a certain juncture, key issues arose. One is that for a seminary, you needed students that have already done considerable preparation in the Arabic language. They most likely have had already a level of knowledge in Islamic law and accessibility to the sources. So a seminary usually is a graduate program. And as such, we needed to reconfigure the project and come back and create a college, a BA degree, and then move into a master and PhD in the future. So in essence, you could say that the current Zaytuna College, which was launched for the first middle class 2009, which next year will be our 10th year anniversary. So the student that came finish the BA degree. Within the BA degree, they finish close to about 70 units of Islamic content. They finish 6 years of Arabic language, and therefore they would be very well qualified to go toward higher education or higher attainment in the Islamic sciences if they chose to go in that direction. And we're about to launch our master degree. We're accepting our first group of students in Zaytuna MA degree in Islamic texts this coming fall. So this is the trajectory in terms of what Zaytuna College is about.
So you mentioned 6 years of Arabic studies,
Yes.
which is very fundamental, very important for anyone who's going to have serious Islamic scholarship. Are there opportunities for those who are willing to learn Arabic or have to learn Arabic, but they would like to begin by understanding the basics of their deen? Is there like auditing courses or other programs that you offer as Zaytuna that would benefit perhaps a student that does not have 6 years of time to invest?
Well, I'll answer this question by providing two ways to think of it. One is we have the program that I'm coming in here to visit New Orleans for, which is Zaytuna in Your Community. And usually this program involves 1, 2, or 3 days, depending on what the community needs. And we could provide them a particular set of programs and material that could fulfill the particular need of the community. In addition, for those who want to pursue the Arabic language specifically, we have the Summer Arabic Intensive. And that program specifically, you finish 1 year of Arabic in the course of 9 weeks. And that's a unique program that fulfills the needs. The last part is that we have decided not to do continuing education at this level of development. We wanted to build, if you want to say, the first room on a correct foundation and build the academic program, and then down the line we come back and create various parts of classes, courses that would address the broader need of the community. So that's something that is coming down the line, including possibly online education, and both require a different type of planning rather than a full-time cohort 24/7 on site. So that all that programs which we used to do during the institute level, we set aside because I think the strategic goal and the importance of building a college was paramount in our planning, that we need to set that aside until a future date.
So, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, Zaytuna College is the first accredited university in the United States that offers Islamic, I don't want to say Islamic studies, but can I say Islamic studies? What should I say?
Well, studying Islam within a traditional school. Zaytuna College is the only accredited Muslim college, not only in the United States, but in the Western world. So there isn't any specifically a college that is built and established from the ground up like Zaytuna College. The distinction between, let's say, what you study Islam, let's say, in the broader academic arena versus studying Islam and engaging in Islam with Zaytuna is whether you are studying the tradition from the outside or you're studying the tradition from within. So Zaytuna College is about studying the tradition from within in order to graduate individuals and practitioners within the Islamic tradition that will go back and serve the community among many other elements relative to Islam. So that's the point of distinction, that rather than say you're at a distance, which essentially engaged in studying about Islam, versus in Zaytuna you study Islam with the eye toward engaging the tradition as a living tradition.
And so for those non-Muslims who are listening to us, and even for those Muslims who may not have studied Islam in any formal way, they know how to practice their daily faith perhaps, but Islam per se, and again, I'm not educating you, I'm educating our audience, but Islam is a way of life. It's a way of life. So yes, you know, the matters of our faith in terms of how we practice our faith are important and part of those studies, but it encompasses everything, politics, art, everything, right?
You could compare it to, let's say, individuals who possibly will go to a Catholic institution to partake in a particular study, to be within the scope of service within Catholicism, or a yeshiva in this way. If you go to, let's say, a college, whether it's Berkeley or another, you study Islam or other religions from a history. You might study it as a sociological phenomena, anthropological phenomena, and those are, again, legitimate ways to study the human experience. But the distinction is that how a particular person trained within their own tradition with the primary focus, again, in examining and looking at the tradition as something that will build and continue to offer the community a continuation of this broad range of the tradition. Often there's a critique that might arise that you're not critical about your own tradition, and this is not really what we are about. You have to be critical, but critical to preserve rather than being critical to deconstruct. And I think that's the point of distinction, is that many people who are engaging or want to engage in the field of not only Islam but religion, that they're approaching to it from a deconstructive approach without really thinking about the epistemic structures that are there, and also epistemology of religion in general, in order to preserve it and move it and transmit it to future generations. So that's again what our project is about. We're not saying anything about someone who wants to pursue other avenues. They're welcome to do it, but this is the project that we are engaged in.
And you're also considered a leading thought expert in decolonial studies. And I've said this on NOLA Matters Islam in the Crescent City before, and like you said, some people may disagree, and that's okay. That's part of the human experience. We have an institution in Greater New Orleans area which is affiliated with a particular Christian religion, and they offer Islamic studies classes, but they do it in terms to deconstruct. And I don't want to, I've mentioned them before on the air, but I want this show to not focus on them, but on your work. So that's why I'm omitting their name right now. But
again, from our perspective, we have about 2,500 mosques in America. We have close to 470 plus schools. We have a vibrant nonprofit sector that is there. So my role is to actually train individuals within the Islamic tradition that are able to fulfill the broader need of the community. The fact that I'm concerned about my community does not mean that I don't have conversation or engage with other communities that I hope and wish that they're doing the same in order to address the broader needs that we have. So the critical issue in here is that there are many that construct an antagonistic view of Islam and Muslims, and that has, again, this long history, whether you point to the period of the Crusades or the period of the Inquisition, the expulsion of 1492, or the colonial period or post-colonial period, the Cold War. So you could actually point which period we are in order to construct the problematization of the Muslim subject in the broader discourse. But at the center of any educational project is what is the mission and what are you trying to accomplish. And again, my view and the view of those who are involved in Zaytuna is that we want to actually to produce the best and the brightest within our own community in order to go back and serve their own community to the highest ability they can. And I think in doing so, there would be an asset to the community that they are in, wherever they are.
So we are a very deeply Catholic city in New Orleans, and in our Catholic institutions, they have hired, and I'm not talking about the high schools, I'm talking at the college level, they've hired Muslim professors with certain scholarship to teach Islam. However, there's other institutions that I mentioned that I feel there are some in the Muslim community that are not aware. If they were to take courses with them, and again, Muslims are not taking courses at these universities, these are non-Muslims, and it's a form of proselytizing for their faith. But for me, I look at this with a critical eye, and I look at what is the scholarship of the professors, and what does their curriculum look like. And I took an opportunity to do that in this one instance, and I realized that all the books that part of their curriculum did not have original sources that were interpreted, because they may have some original sources, like the Quran, the Holy Quran, for example, but then they were interpreted by non-Muslims. For me, this is a red flag, but again, I'm not a scholar. We don't have any scholars in residence in our city. What would be one, I hate to say a tip, but what would be one way that the youth, and so many of us that now live in a world where we're not really guided on matters of the faith, to know when these red flags are, when we're taking a course in a university or a Christian institution and they say, oh, we're teaching Islam, and that we should know, well, what kind of scholarship should these professors have? What kind of sources should they be using?
I think just to speak about in terms of Zaytuna, I think from the get-go, our project and what we engaged in is in conversation with other religious traditions. For example, our current dean himself is a Catholic, Dr. Mark Dell. We have a Franciscan monk that teaches for us as a full-time faculty member. He teaches the freshman seminar, teaches rhetoric, and so on. Person also comes to us as a person who teaches U.S. constitutional law for us, is a Catholic, who actually was the lawyer for the Catholic diocese in the Bay Area. And then we are located in what's called the Graduate Theological Union, which is a theological seminary that has 9 different Christian denominations, including they also have an Islamic Studies Center, a Jewish Studies Center, a Buddhist Studies Center, and most recently they have put together a Hindu Studies Center. So we're located at a place which allows us to have these conversations with other religious traditions in order, again, to better our own community and the community around us. My critique of a particular trajectory of teaching Islam at the academy is that there are many elements in there that we need to challenge. One is, again, for those who have possibly read Edward Said, the heavy presence of Orientalist discourse and Orientalist construction of not only the Muslim subject, Muslim territories, and other places. So as we read the sources and we see what is being offered and posited toward the Muslim subject, we need to identify this. Second, I think one has to be aware the heavy burden of modern media and the coverage that takes place. Therefore, it actually produces a set of wrong questions to be asked. And those wrong questions become the basis by which research and writing about the Muslims and the Muslim subject, the Muslim world takes place. And I think the work of Jack Shaheen, Real Bad Arabs, which focuses on the media discourse, as well as Edward Said covering Islam, is very important in relations to this. The other part is as we speak into the current period of post 9/11, where the only lens by which a Muslim is engaged with is the lens of terrorism. And I had an article that said Muslims are studied but not known, that we have so many studies that focus on the Muslim subject, but it's actually not the Muslim subject, him or herself, are not known, which also could be extended to something else, that Muslims themselves are also have become internalizing their own otherization or their own construction in the popular imagination, that we have the phenomena of double consciousness, which is the work of W.D. Du Bois on this case, is very important and critical. So again, all these have to be understood. So when you go to a classroom, unless you are aware of the multiplicities of lenses that Islam and Muslims are constructed by, so you get into the assignments and the reading material, which for me the preponderance of material that is placed in front of us in the academy are very problematic. Is placed by what I consider today is embedded intellectuals. These are intellectuals that write and engage in order to have or to engage in solving imperial questions, not addressing the needs of the particular people they study. And I think that's a very important way to distinguish and be able to understand when you go into the academy what are the impulses that are affecting both the study of Islam as well as the offered solutions, quote, to the problem of Islam. Again, Islam is a problem rather than being a tradition that is rich and diverse of 1.2 or 1.4 billion Muslims. So I think those are very important.
So there was a lot there. You said just a lot, and for a lot of the youth in our community who consider themselves those in the path of social justice, you presented some writers and some thought leaders that they should be familiar with absolutely before they engage in this work that they call social justice. They need to understand the foundation of those that came before them and what has been said about how Islam has been presented in the West. They need to have, I would say it's beneficial to have a little bit of a historic understanding. But we didn't bring up Zaytun. We began the hour by saying by the fig and the olive. And so I know what Zaytun is, and my family background is from Spain, so Zaytuna, La Zaytuna, and Zaytun in Arabic. So Zaytun Institute even even the meaning of it, right? Even the meaning of it comes from this Abrahamic tradition, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about why Zaytuna and what connects us?
The olive tree is a sacred tree. It's present in the Quranic verses which you recited, Wattini was Zaytun chapter, by God swearing by the olives and the figs, which also are, in terms of nutrition, two sources of nutrition that often are unmatched in terms of their benefits. And if you add dates, which is the three things that often is identified with the Muslim culture and tradition in terms of the nutrition, no Muslim table is complete without having one of the three being there. So that's an element, that's a sacred tree. It's always been identified with having medicinal qualities, but also got identified the light of guidance, made a comparison, an analogy with the olive tree in the sense, and saying it's not from the east nor from the west, and its light is about to burst in illumination without the fire touching it. So this is again the concept of Nurun ala Nur, the first Nur being the divine light, and the second light is the light of the Prophet and his guidance in this sense. Also the olive tree has been also the reference to the university, Zaytuna University, which is also one of the oldest universities in Tunisia. But when we were thinking about the name, it was not really relative to Zaytuna in Tunisia, but in reference to the Quranic text, and to say that we will be a middle path in the tradition that we are trying to establish. Lastly, I would say that the olive tree, when you plant it, it takes a long time before it actually gives you its first crop. Sometimes more than 8 years before you get your crop, and then it also digs deep down in its roots to draw the water and continue to produce the fruits of the tree, which is similar as knowledge. That knowledge takes a long time for it to be produced. You need to dig very deep into the sources that are there that brought us understanding and brought us the illumination. So in essence, you have to be a person that is ready to do this, and sometimes also that you don't realize that olives, before you actually treat it, it's a little bit sour, and therefore you have to put yourself through the hardship in order to study. This quick mode these days where you could have instantaneous gratification and you could become immediately over a minute or share and like on social media, and all of a sudden you posit yourself as being a person of knowledge or significance, have to be challenged. That there has to be endurance, struggle, staying up late hours to go through and prepare yourself to actually study and engage with this tradition. So in that sense, the symbolism of olives, or the olive tree, is akin to the journey of a student and the journey for the one who is pursuing knowledge, and I think it's an apt description for the person.
That was so beautiful. I had never thought about it that way, and I had a brief opportunity to share with you how my family and I had been to Spain, and you could still see the legacy of the Muslims and Al-Andalus, and you could still see the olive trees planted everywhere in southern Spain.
Spain is the largest producer of olives in the world,
and so
olive oil as well.
That legacy is more than just the fruits and the beautiful buildings like the Alhambra.
The olives, the oranges, the vineyards, the architecture, what we call in the West today as Spanish architecture, is actually Islamic architecture with the particular play of light, water, and the courtyard. All this is very symbolic because the Muslims actually put their paradise on the inside, and therefore their architecture reflected their vision or view of what the paradise could be. And therefore it's not surprising that that relationship exists in architecture, because people represent their inward state through buildings, through architecture, through things that they make to fulfill their daily life. And that's why if you look at what Muslims produce through the classical period, is actually most of it right now fits in museums, and people actually visit it because it reflects their inward state. Compared to modern architecture, I am very critical of modern architecture. I see it's just it's only focused on glorifying and elevating the material, and therefore it's not commensurate with an inward state as such. So it's not surprising that that many of our modern buildings do not produce the tranquility nor the sense of ease or peace that you are seeking, because they're not constructed with an epistemology that is founded upon a different conceptualization. So that, again, I would be very critical of modern architecture, because it's not commensurate with a tranquil, peaceful state. It's subjugating the environments and subjugating our surrounding to a bottom line that has nothing to do with something that is metaphysical.
I want to continue in that line of conversation, but first I'm going to take a minute to do some station identification. If you're just tuning in, this is WHIV LP New Orleans, your community radio station for social justice and human rights and all wars. We're on 102.3 FM on your radio. We're also live streamed all over the world on WHIVFM.org. This is Jenny Yanez on NOLA Matters, Islam in the Crescent City. Our special guest for today is actually visiting the Greater New Orleans area, but he has now been told that this is his home. Whenever he comes back, he has a family here, and he's always welcome. He is actually going to be speaking while he's in New Orleans. He's going to be speaking in Masjid Omar, which is one of the two largest mosques in the Greater New Orleans area, on the bonds of brotherhood. And before we talk a little bit about what that talk is going to be about, he was speaking about the deep roots of the olive tree, and went on about, we also spoke about matters of internalization of identity, right? When talking about how, internal oppression, right? Internalized oppression. And to me, those are connected with matters of identity. And he spoke about Andalusia and the rich historic contributions of the Muslims to Europe, which actually led to the Renaissance, and many of the things that we are not told that were thanks to the work of the Muslims in southern Spain from 711 to about 1492, although that legacy lasted a little longer, and it's being rediscovered, and it's being revived, in my opinion. Of course, Dr. Bazian can expound on that, but a lot of our youth, Muslim youth and adults, do not know the richness of that history. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about internalization in terms of these, colonial thoughts that you mentioned Islam as a problem instead of as a tradition. And so, knowing a little bit about the history of Islam in Spain, of Al-Andalus, you see that they were stripped of their faith, pretty much forcefully, right? Forced to leave their faith, or die, or be told to leave, in very, very harsh conditions. And many Muslims struggled to secretly stay Muslim. Whereas now we live in a society that's quote unquote, and I will say that, I'm the host of the show, quote unquote a free society, where we are told that we can practice our religion openly. And yet there are still Muslims among us that choose to kind of hide that identity, or maybe they don't know what their identity is to begin with, because I've heard terms as, I'm stuck in between two cultures. I've heard a lot of youth and even adult Muslims say, I'm stuck in between two cultures. And that's an interesting term, right? Because what is your identity? Can you be fully Muslim and be fully American? And what does it mean to be an American Muslim? Is that even a term?
Well, I think the problem is far more complex. In terms of just thinking of Spain and the Inquisition period, which, again, the Inquisition was not a single event, but rather a process that lasted from the early 13th century and continued up to middle of the 1600s, with a large expulsion taking place in 1609, with the Moriscos being expelled. And then in Granada and in southern Spain, the Inquisition was to really transform the region by emptying out, removing what's called the external other, Muslims and Jews. So Muslims were not allowed to dress their Muslim garb, were not allowed to practice their religion, were forced to consume pork in public and alcohol as an evidence of their conversion. So you had a structure that wanted to transform southern Spain into a predominantly Christian, and then attached to that the invention of whiteness. And this whole theory of purity of race emerges out of those circumstances. Now, I argue that today, under the period of heavily Islamophobic period, Muslims are likewise being relegated into a similar type of structure that affects their identity of who they are. I wrote a piece that was focusing on Europe. Does Europe have an Inquisition problem? In France, the hijab and the niqab are prohibited in public schools, in public jobs or civic jobs, and there is a heavy curtailment of Muslim spaces. They're subject to hyper-securitization. The fact that somebody says that you have an arena of freedom have to be commensurate of what are the structure to enjoy and practice your freedom. So again, in France, this hyper-securitization of Muslim bodies and space is in effect. In Switzerland, there's a ban on the minaret that was used by right-wing parties in order to limit the ability of Muslims to practice their religion in their religious space. The UK has a unique engagement, even though there's a large Muslim population that's been there. Increasingly, there is a rise of the right wing, especially the UKIP party, which was behind the Brexit vote, that wants to curtail and limit the expansion of their rights and their ability to live as equal citizens. In the United States, we might not be challenged with possibly walking around with the hijab or possibly a beard, but make no mistake about it, we are subject to hyper securitization structure. Muslims are subject to monitoring in their mosques. They are subject to increased intrusion in their privacy under the Patriot Act, surveillance of their communication, flying while Muslim, and a host of other elements. And I think with the current president in the White House, whom I call as the Islamophobe in chief, and have clustered around him in the White House a den of Islamophobes, lately being joined by John Bolton. So that has an effect on the individual. One of our faculty members at UC Berkeley, Letty Volp, wrote an article that actually looked at, in terms of citizenship, when we speak of citizenship, there are certain rights that accrue from citizenship. And in essence, her conclusion that Muslims are unequal citizens. She's in the law school. So as such, the effect of this is on individuals' particular exercise of identity might be challenged at this point. And as such, I would say that Muslims are walking around with a heavy burden of Islamophobia that nobody is recognizing and expecting to actually walk and act normal. And I think the norm is the abnormality of their existence in the current period.
And you were very kind, referring to the person in the Oval Office as president. On my show, we call him 45. But you did write an article called The Den of Islamophobes?
The Den of Islamophobes.
Yeah, so on this show, we refer to him as 45. And you did bring up the systemic view of Islamophobia.
Again, I think
touched on it, of course,
I think Trump represents the wave rather than he is the originator. Remind you that Islamophobia was directed at Obama when he ran in 2008. And at the time, it actually was directed at him by Hillary Clinton just as much as McCain at the time. When she was asked whether he is a Muslim or not, or he is a Christian or not, she said if he said it, then he is. She never defended him. And then some evidence that her actual campaign sent the photographs of Obama dressed in the Kenyan outfit at the time, pushing the narrative that he's a closet Muslim. So, and then during the debate between Clinton and Trump, Clinton only thought of Muslims as being helpers in securing us. So in essence, the good bad Muslim in this cartography was that the bad Muslims again is the one identified with terrorism, and the good Muslim is the one that protects the dominant society. So we have no agency of our own that fills the spectrum, and therefore one has to understand that Islamophobia is part of a longer durée rather than only focusing on Trump. Vile as he is, boastful in his Islamophobia is correct, but I'd rather deal with the boastful in-your-face Islamophobia than with the sophisticated latte type that would engage with the same Islamophobic discourse, but are able to cover it up because they've been able to play the sophisticated game. So I think we need to understand where the origin, and this is not a defense of Trump, he's a vile person. As far as I'm concerned, it does not represent the best of our society, but from our tradition, كَمَا أَنْتُمْ يُوَلَّ عَلَيْكُمْ, as you are, those who are leading you represents where you are at. So in that sense, that's a reflection of where the society is at this particular time.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because we frequently just focus on what's in front of us historically, and we're blaming now one person for what really our entire the history of the United States was based on.
Just use
a lot of
what you call Exhibit A. Just look at the African American history in this country.
Yes.
From post-construction period from 1776 to 1950, almost 4,000 lynchings take place in the 12 southern states. Lynching was a process of challenging the empowerment of African Americans to challenge their political, economic, social, and religious rights at a time where whites did not want to treat or accept African Americans as equal. And I would argue that post-civil rights movement, imprisonment has been the response or the attempt to limit the empowerment of African Americans by using the prison industrial complex. So when people are in prison, then they lose the right to vote, they're disenfranchised, and then they come out unable to really function in society. 1 in 4 African American men is either locked up or is entangled in the legal system. So imprisonment in the prison industrial complex is the dominant society's response to the empowerment of African Americans of the civil rights movement. So I think what we need is to have a very clear understanding of what American society is about and not get the delusional state. And I think some Muslims, especially from those who are possibly immigrant, maybe less so the African Americans who reverted to Islam, is they come to America to try to partake in what they consider to be the American dream. And the American dream is basically thinking of the White House as the focal point, wanting to move up and become part of the dominant society, which is interestingly that they're leaving the Black House, which is Mecca, in order to strive for the White House. So in this sense, there's an epistemic of differentiation. The White House represents the materiality of this world, and the Black House is you leave the world behind you in order to arrive toward the divine. So I think it's very important for us to critique the system and the structures, but not to get us into an incapacity or the anger, a sense of anger, but rather to ground ourselves in order to understand what is it that we are actually fighting for. We need to fight for a different world. That different world is to make the world better, inclusive, to be that which is, in essence, hospitable, like you're being put as a custodian of the world, but the custodian is the one that actually makes everyone around them better, rather than, again, thinking or focusing on an act of anger or a response based on wanting more power. Power is fleeting, it changes. One day you have it and the next day you don't. Wealth is fleeting, one day you have it, one day you don't. But having and building something better and different, that's everlasting in a sense, because people can refer back to it and remember that was a point of difference.
And it's very human nature for us to seek justice, but however, justice is also based.
Justice is divine. One of the 99 names of God is Al-Adl, the all just. All justice in the world comes from the all just. But we need to distinguish between where
mercy and knowledge, and also what is
where is it coming from?
Right.
Because sometimes we organize because our self-interest is motivating us, and therefore people have to ask the question: why you're organizing? Why you're out there? Is it just to get a picture on the front page? Is it centering yourself and decentering the justice?
To be on Instagram?
To be on Instagram. You know, people think these days that sharing and liking on, say, Facebook or Twitter and so on is organizing. This is just basically centering yourself, not to discount the social media. But again, what are you doing in relations to social justice? When you engage in acts of justice, you're engaging in divine acts. Right? And therefore, in divine acts, you have to ask, am I doing it for the right reasons? And am I on the side of the divine, or am I wanting the divine to be on my side, right or wrong? So those are very important when you're engaging in one of the commands of God. At the same time, that you have to always have the eye of mercy in there, because I think the overarching umbrella for Islam is mercy. To balance mercy with justice, because God says that my mercy have overtaken my wrath. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was sent, he said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ verily I was sent but to complete the best of manner, and وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, verily we have not sent you except a mercy to mankind. So again, the overarching umbrella of divine understanding is mercy, as well as the Prophet's mercy, but under it is the concept of justice and how to attain it. And that's, I think, what is being asked of us.
And one of the distinctions that the state of Louisiana has is we are the state with the highest incarceration rate in the country, and we know as
it makes money. It makes money.
We have privately owned and run prisons in Louisiana, and we're also the country with the highest amount of incarcerated people in the world.
Sure.
So Louisiana is the incarcerated capital of the world. We have organizations that are connected with WHIVLP in some ways, that are not just addressing and advocating for this, but fighting.
It's criminal. It's
right.
criminal what's taken place, because again,
the new Jim Crow, basically.
The new Jim Crow. You are completely dispossessing people, disenfranchising them, and you're making money out of it. That's a level of sickness that's beyond.
Welcome to the South, Dr.
Well, I study it and I teach it, but I understand.
We totally
and again,
appreciate
even
those sentiments.
Our university was invested our retirement funds in the prison industrial complex. Now, just to think that the university retirement of a faculty that's supposed to uplift the human condition is actually invested in locking people up and locking their future horizon. That's a level of unethical, immoral conduct that I could not conceive. We forced the university to divest, but I think this is what we need to do to force the institutions that invest in. For me, what it is like creating an immoral structure that is the foundation of society, taking a whole group of people, not only that they were in slavery, not only that they were subject to Jim Crow, but now they're locked up in prison and they're being the source of income and growth for a group that continuously want to lock them up and keep them away from contributing. And think what is the potential that is being locked up in there. Now for the Muslims, again, they often want to read Malcolm X. But my argument for them is the Malcolm X you're waiting for is locked up right now in some prison across this country. And therefore, while I enjoy for you to read Malcolm X and continue to read his story, but I want you to actually get the other Malcolm X that is waiting for you. And there are many that across this country. So get up and begin to do the work that is needed to transform the society. And don't tell me, again, this cause, I am a person that works on Palestine, works on Islamophobia, works on environmental justice, but also works on prison industrial complex, works on the military industrial complex in order for us to change. These are connected, and you need to understand those connectivities that are there in order to change the society.
It's structural, it's systemic, it is not bigotry.
Yes.
Right? So a lot of people think Islamophobia is bigotry, is the man that pulls the hijab off the woman in the line at the grocery store. That's this individual bigotry. Yes, it's a side effect of this, but systemically it is really the deep roots of the West.
It's very, very deep. And again,
yes.
if you have to look at the structures and systems, in essence, the audacity of the Islamophobe that hits a woman or pulls her hijab, the audacity is there is a political structure that is protecting that individual and telling him that the woman or the Muslim man is the problem and therefore you are empowered to do so. And I don't want to say it, but Fox News reports it completely different. When somebody takes their fist to a Muslim face, Fox News report that a Muslim face intercepted a fist in mid-air and causing laceration on the hand. And then they'll go and test the blood on the hand if it's connected to terrorism. But that, again, is part of the media discourses reflects the priority of the elites. And therefore, I think David Miller Group in the UK identifies that the state and the state apparatus, the structures are the one that actually produces the racial structures that then the individuals actually take these acts because they've been stoked into exercising or expressing the state or the elite priorities. And I think what we need is to challenge this aspect of it at a structural, systematic way.
And I didn't mean to laugh because it's not funny, it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It is so ridiculous because what you pointed out, it's like we joke about it, but it's just so ridiculous at this point. And there are people who will take that as news,
Sure.
as facts.
Just think about, an African American gets shot, defenseless, without a weapon on it. The discussion becomes not about the person being shot by the police, it becomes about trying to kill him again in our consciousness. There is the crime of shooting him, which is a crime, but there is the crime of what I consider to be media talking heads that kills this person again and again and again in everybody's consciousness. The first crime was singular, the second crime is a massive crime because it killed the individual, his history, his family, his tradition, and all of our collective memory. And now we begin to speak only about the criminal record, or his cousin that had a criminal record, or someone else rather than a human being has been shot, defenseless, for no other reason that he was walking while black, or driving while black, or sitting while black, or sitting while black. And that same thing in relation to a Muslim. Anything happens to him, it must be connected by 6 degrees to terrorism. So the question becomes about the violence and terrorism rather than the crime that's been committed to the individual. And I think it's important for us to challenge those.
And I think our understanding our place as Muslims in the West and our role in speaking out about that is important. And for those that have listened to the show before, and my friends and families and allies and colleagues, etc., they know that I will go to, for example, Black Lives Matter rally, and I saw you at the last one I went to in Baltimore, actually, for in honoring kind of the memory of Stephen Clark, who was basically slaughtered, according to Sheikh Omar Suleiman, who Said Shakr, who's a professor and a co-founder of Zaytuna as well, performed his funeral, and they tried to do the ritual washing, and they said that they couldn't really do it as respectfully as the body deserved. I'm trying to be very sensitive with my words, because he was slaughtered by these gunshots. So not just showing up to the Black Lives Matter rallies, not just showing up, but you're an educator and you speak out and you're an unapologetic Muslim. But I will say, and to tie this in a little bit with what we were saying about our role as Muslims and the immigrant community and the immigrant Muslim community in the United States. Now, their children are sometimes second and third generation, sometimes first generation. They are not as outspoken about this, and this is not part of Islam, and you know this better than
their priorities are somewhere else. And I think what we need is, again, there has to be an educational campaign. There has to be a building of awareness, building coalitions to understand what we are facing collectively. And this is, on the one hand, critiquing, but at the same time not to allow the fragmentation that comes with the strategies that we're pursuing. My sense is that what we need is to reconfigure a new and robust civil rights movement that would address the issues that we are facing. It's not surprising that the three fundamental gains of the civil rights movement of the 1960s were the Civil Rights Act, the Immigration Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. These are the three that are under assault today for a particular reason, because it wanted to transfer and change American society to something better. And those forces that refused the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 are the same forces today that are coming out of the woodwork to try to push back the clock, challenging and wanting to reverse those gains because they have not reconciled themselves that the America of the past that practiced racism, that had different fountains, that prioritized and structured itself around white supremacy is no longer tenable, nor can it be reconstructed. So that's what you're seeing, what Martin Luther King spoke about in his Three Evils of Society speech, of this white reactionary and stoking white reactions to the gains of the civil rights movement or the civil rights act and so on, is the same forces that are speaking today. It's not surprising that we're still dealing with the monuments from the Confederate period. It's not surprising that we're still dealing with immigration and immigration act. It's not surprising that in Trump's mind that he wants to bring or wants Norwegian to be favored over others. I recently had a conference in Sweden on Islamophobia, and in one of the archives in Sweden, one of the researchers discovered that America recruited 1 million Swedes to immigrate to America in the early part of the 20th century when they had the Chinese Exclusionary Act and they wanted to reconfigure the American society. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is part of the long history. America has been founded upon an original sin of racism being intertwined at the roots. And so far, every opportunity, every period of attempting to undo this and to change, you get this massive reactionary force that rears its ugly head and tries to push the society backward. My argument is that they will not be successful because they are basing their agenda on something that is despised, something that is morally and ethically is indefensible. What we need is to be smart and to understand what is required for us to claim the higher ground and to claim the different narrative that will actually transform the society. I think it's doable, it's possible, but we need to align ourselves correctly that we don't get distracted by some of the side, what I consider to be side battles and side issues that are not focused on the critical issues that are facing us today.
One of the things you said was we can't allow ourselves to become fragmented, and yes, we cannot allow the fitna to say the immigrant Muslims or the children of the immigrant Muslims, the African American Muslims, but education and awareness and advocacy for the intention of the cause goes together with becoming more aware and understanding, more educated on your own deen. Sure. On your own deen, because yes, I have said before in the air so many times, the most patriotic Americans I've ever met are those that are immigrants. Because sometimes they're like, well, I'm not going to protest because, this country gave me opportunities, this country gave me a right. And the idea is that dissent is patriotic, that you're trying to make a nation that is,
and again, we don't want to say that there isn't opportunities. There are opportunities, but one has to understand if you're blessed, and you get blessing, there is more required of you, right? And as such, that has to be understood. Also, we are a tradition that is grounded in being a goodness to others. So when you are one place, you have to be an agent. We make a distinction in Quran, Islamic text, between salih and muslih. You could be good in your own self, but it's a higher order to be a muslih, one that causes rectification, that causes benefits society. We want to be muslihun. We want to be the ones who rectify the society, that actually bring benefits to everyone. And I think that's part of the narrative. It's not surprising that the first word in the Quran is iqra, that was revealed. Meaning read, ground yourself, understand what's your purpose in this life in order for us to make the change.
Dr. Bazian, I would love to continue this conversation. And I usually say that the show, the hour just flies, but I really mean it this time.
Thank you.
And I had you as a captive audience, literally, literally captive, and I really appreciate. I hope that those that listen will take a lot of what you said as the beginning of their continued growth, so that they could study more. And you said a few things. One of the things that you said was, we have to have some form of sacrifice, some kind of discipline, and understanding that this study, this foundation, is going to take years sometimes. that we're a society that wants everything right
instantaneous.
away. Instantaneous. And we have the Instagram, and again, I use social media as well. There's benefits to that, and it's also judged by your intention. But we have the YouTube scholars, etc. And if you can benefit from something, but understand that true scholarship requires dedication and sacrifice, and those that you're studying from, you should know what their sacrifice and was as well. If you're going to spend all these years studying under their feet, then you should understand what that is, and you should respect them. You should be grateful. You did mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you are grateful, I will give you more. So that doesn't just mean, I'm grateful because America allowed me to live here. That's not exactly what that means. And if we had more time, of course, I would love to continue benefiting from you. I want to say, Jazakallah khair, may Allah bless you immensely for the time that you spend with us and for all the work that you do, not just in this country, but around the world. And you did answer, Islamophobia is not something in America, it's something that we see globally. And I think you did answer that quite in a lot of detail for us, and I really appreciate it. Again, if you're tuned in, this is Jenny Yanez on NOLA Matters Islam in the Crescent City on WHIV-LP New Orleans, your community radio station for social justice and human rights. And all wars. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.